Good morning, welcome to CATEX TV. My name is Frank Fortunato. Today is Tuesday, September 18th, 2012. The American presidential election is 7 weeks from today. The territorial dispute between China and Japan is gathering pace. Analysts are warning that it could hurt trade relationships and bring Japanese producers more losses than the earthquake last year. That's pretty hard to believe. However, the Nikkei index today in Tokyo showed that the largest Japanese car maker by sales in China, Nissan, dropped 5.2%. Honda dropped about 3%, while Fast Retailing, a company that has Japanese outlets in China, dropped 6%. According to an analyst, the escalating dispute is adding one more layer of uncertainty. The China Automobile Dealers Association has warned that protests will hurt sellers of Toyota, Nissan, and Honda in China more than the Japanese March 2011 quake. Many showrooms in China selling Japanese cars have closed. Yesterday, a number of major Japanese companies announced factory shutdowns and closed stores in China in the days before a possible fresh round of protests. Panasonic even said that one of its plants had been sabotaged by Chinese workers and would remain closed through midweek. The two countries have been arguing over a group of uninhabited islands in the East China Sea. Last week, the Japanese government announced that it had purchased 3 of the islands from a family that owned them. The Chinese were infuriated, and this triggered large-scale protests across the country. XL Re CEO Mike McGavick doesn't mince words. He's been talking for quite some time that the reinsurance and insurance industry needs to become relevant and fast. He laid that out at the Reinsurance Rendezvous in Monte Carlo last week. He said that they need to address emerging risks, innovate, create new products, and provide potential insurance buyers with the coverage they want and need, or risk becoming increasingly irrelevant. He pointed out that between 2002 and 2011, global GDP grew about 3.8% a year, but the industry's growth was only 2.5%. He talked a little bit about the technology sector. He pointed out that Apple's current market cap is already bigger than the combined total of the P&C sector cap itself. He also mentioned the energy industry. He cited the Gulf oil spill as being symptomatic of what's going on. He said that in the Gulf oil spill, the property and casualty industry and the reinsurance industry was barely even present, mainly because British Petroleum was self-insured. He said, quote, they looked at the balance sheet they had, they looked at our entire sector's balance sheet, and said, frankly, you can't really help. He said basically the energy sector's capitalization at over $800 billion is 5 times larger than the P&C insurance sector. He said when we get too small, we can become irrelevant. McGavick has been talking a little bit about the need for the companies to begin to market the knowledge and experience they have insofar as the practices that industries and companies have been incurring over the past decades and generations. He said that instead of responding to events such as the Thai floods by imposing sublimits and exclusions in order to minimize their losses, what they would better be doing is in fact establishing new products that would better account for business continuity and business interruption problems that their clients have. From your lips to God's ears, Mr. McGavick. Typhoon Sanba made landfall in South Korea yesterday. It dumped about 11 inches of rain on the east coast as it moved north. About 175 passenger ships have been stranded, and a number of flights, both international and domestic, were canceled. Shell Oil has decided to hold off for now in putting a large containment dome over there off the coast of Alaska underseas Arctic drilling effort. They've decided that because of the pending bad weather as well as the coming up Alaska Natives whaling season that's about to start, they would hold off until spring. Also, they noticed that they had a little bit of a failure on the dome's test off of Bellingham, Washington last week. 7 Turkish soldiers were killed today by an attack by the terrorist group, the PKK, as a military convoy was ambushed. About 36,000 homes have been destroyed in Nigeria by flooding. This has been happening in the state of Jigawa because of a river overflow from the Hadejia and Jamare River. On Friday, Bermuda had a close call. The popular cruise ship industry saw a grazing event. Apparently, the Norwegian Star broke free from a mooring line at the King's Wharf pier. A 45-mile-an-hour sudden wind came up. Those ships are very large, and if hit at the right direction, they simply act as giant sails. And that's what happened here. The wind pushed the boat 2,500 feet off the dock, snapped the mooring cables, spun the ship around, and the Norwegian Star spun around and grazed another ship called the Explorer of the Seas. Using winches, they had to pull the ship back into dock. No one was injured, and it appears that the damage was minimal. However, both ships are still being checked out. That's the news for today. If we have any breaking news, we'll come back and tell you. Thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow.